Okay, cool. All right, well, we will move on to Hamza, who will be talking about ZenML and how to use it with great expectations.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Kyle. Everyone can hear me well? Like Kyle, maybe a thumbs up? Okay, all right.
Yep, you're good.
All right, cheers. I'm gonna share my screen. So there it is. All right. I only have one screen, so it's gonna be, have to have our pictures on it. I hope that's fine. Or is that fine, like Kyle, or should I share like just a window for the recording?
Yeah, I mean, whatever works for you.
No, this
I
works.
can't actually, we can't see the Zoom stuff if that's what you're talking about.
All right, perfect. Cool. Okay, so let me start with an introduction. So I'm Hamza, one of the co-founders of ZenML, and I guess the good place to start, it would be what is ZenML for the Great Expectations community. ZenML is a MLOps framework that allows you to create modular and portable ML pipelines. The way we like to describe it is we like to say that ZenML is a three-step process. So you integrate your tools, you author your workflows, and then you orchestrate them anywhere. And while it looks like a pipelining tool, similar to Glue or like what we just saw, or also like other famous pipelining tools like Airflow or Dagster now or Kubeflow, it's really not an orchestration tool. ZenML is more like something that sits on top of the orchestrators and lets you write these pipelines which are machine learning specific, and then you can run on any orchestrator of your choice. So if you wanted to run on Glue, if you wanted to run on Kubeflow, Airflow, like some of these we have out of the box with ZenML, but you could also add your own. So you could like create a portable pipeline that just defines your business logic, your machine learning specific logic, and then where it runs depends on what we call the ZenML stack. So the first step is usually to create a pipeline. You can see this in this visualization. The way to create a pipeline, I'll show you in a second. You just annotate some functions, some Python functions with the add step. Then you create a stack. This is a second step. So you have to create where and how the pipeline runs in what we call a stack. And a stack has the orchestrator, the artifacts where they should be stored, feature stores, experiment trackers, model deployers, and importantly for this meeting, data validators. And these, like this is sort of done outside of the workflow. So you just do this once and then you share it across with your team. And then finally, you can build your own stuff as well. But if you just want to use the standard ones or you just want to extend it, extend the framework, you can. And then you combine the pipeline and the stack together, and the pipeline runs on the stack of your choice. So that's the theory. I want to jump straight into the demo because we've been working very hard to create different sorts of stack components, as you might imagine, because we live in the world of abstractions. We are in a lot of ways a standardized way of writing machine learning pipelines. And one of the biggest assets or aspects which we were missing a month ago before we started working with tools like Great Expectations was this notion of a data validation component. So we had orchestration, we had deployment, we had experiment tracking, but a lot of our users came to us and said, hey, what if I want to detect drift, or what if I want to check my data quality as data flows through the pipeline? And therefore, we started looking at Great Expectations because that was the most obvious first choice. And when we looked into Great Expectations, eventually we ended up integrating Great Expectations in a way where we like to think of it as you create ZenML pipelines and you continuously validate your data using Great Expectations. So it's sort of a continuous process, like just like what we saw before, but ZenML takes care of a lot of the heavy lifting for you. And it does things which complement the Great Expectations offering quite well. And let's see how it works. So for this, you need to first understand what the stack is going to look like. So we're going to create two pipelines today. We're going to create a profiling pipeline, and we're going to create a validation pipeline. We're going to talk about each of these individually, but these pipelines are going to run on a great expectation stack that I've set up. A stack in the ZenML world has three components that you need to define for sure. So one is who is actually executing it. So the orchestrator. For now, I've chosen the local orchestrator, but you can also have the same demo on Kubeflow or Airflow or Glue automatically just by switching this component. There's another metadata store. So this is mislabeled. This should be metadata store, which is basically the tracking database of all these pipelines. And then we have the artifact store, which is that things that go in and out of pipeline steps, where are they stored? In this case, I've chosen S3, but you could choose any cloud provider. And the fourth component that I've added to it is the data validator, which is the Great Expectations data validator. How do you set that up in code? So the way you do that is you just have to run these commands. So like ZenML allows you to register these individual stack components on the command line. So the first thing I'll have to do is I'll have to create an artifact store. So I can just do this for one. You can see, okay, this is successfully registered. I've given it a flavor and I've given it a path. So this will now store everything running in the pipeline in this bucket. If, by the way, I ever wanted to see all of my artifact stores, I could look at them. So you can see I have two here. One is my local one and one is my S3 one. I'll quickly do the data validator as well. So now I have my artifact store, and I want to register my great expectations data validator. This is also very simple. ZenML data validator register. You give it a name and then you give it the flavor. And there are some parameters that are extra. I've used the default sane defaults, but you can configure your great expectations through these commands. And you just have to do this once. And then the next command, what it does is it actually registers an S3 stack. Well, I gave it the name S3 stack. This is the thing that you see here. And I'm using the metadata store to be the default one. I'm using the orchestration to be default. And then I'm just going to add the artifact store, the one that I just registered. And I'm going to add my data validation, the one that I just registered as well. And then I'm going to set this stack to be active. So that's the first step you have to do. This is a bit ZenML heavy, but it's a bit of a, like we have to go through this step, one configuration step in order to hook things up. And then you get a lot of power out of that. So by the way, once this stack is set, you would be able to list all your stacks. So if you have many other great expectations or buckets, like different sorts of stacks, you could share them across your team like this, but that's something for later. Right now, my current active stack is the one that I just created. All right, now let's start creating my pipeline after I've created my stack. Just going to do some imports. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create two pipelines, as I said. One pipeline is going to profile a data automatically. So for that, I need some data, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the breast cancer data set, which is a simple tabular data set that everybody's probably familiar with. I'm going to return that in my first step, which I call the importer. And you can see that ZenML works in Python. So this is basically a simple Python function decorated with a special step annotation. And then the next step that I have to create is going to be slightly different. Here, I'm going to use my two big new steps that we've introduced with this integration. It's the Great Expectations Profiler step and the Great Expectations Validator step. These two steps are doing different things. The Profiler step is actually profiling a data set and creating an expectation suite based on the auto profiling that comes built in with Great Expectations. The next step is taking an expectation suite name and a data set, and it's actually computing the expectation data docs. So those are the two steps that come built in with ZenML. All you have to do is import them and instantiate them here. By the way, I'm doing all of this in a notebook. We encourage you to do this in scripts, but it's a bit easier to illustrate. All right. And then the next step, what I'm going to do is I will get a checkpoint result, which is a result of a greater expectations validation sweep. And I'm going to use this to actually print out if my expectation was successful or not. The reason I've added this step is I wanted to show that ZenML has made it easy to actually pass results of great expectations suites and checkpoints between steps. So that's a very powerful thing, which I'll show you in a second. So these are the steps I need. And now I need to put these steps together in a pipeline. So that's quite simple. The first one I'm going to do is the profiling pipeline that just has 2 steps. It's going to import the data and it's going to profile it using the profiler. The second step is even, well, equally simple. I have the importer step, I have the validator step, and then I have the checker step, which takes the result of the validation. And you can see this is also quite simple Python. I won't go much into detail, but it's basically saying, hey, this function returns 2 things. One thing goes to this function, the other thing goes to that function. It's a bit like a keras model. Cool. So after all that is done, we actually need to create a run. So you can think of these pipelines as recipes, which are abstract. And we now need to plug in our concrete steps into our pipelines. So that's what I'm going to do. Won't go into the weeds here, but I'm just going to run these 2 pipelines. And what's happening now is it's using the S3 stack. So because it's using the S3 stack, it's actually running this pipeline locally, but it's storing the results in S3. So if I go over to my S3 bucket, I could, I mean, right now I have 4, but if I refresh, I should be able to see 5 things. I don't know which one it was. And here, this is my stack unique ID, right? So if I saw my stack's unique ID, I would be able to see it. And here you can see that all my expectations and checkpoints are automatically tracked for you. So you don't need to do anything. You just need to call that step and it works automatically or automagically. The first pipeline, what it's doing is it's just taking this data frame and it's just profiling it and creating an expectation suite. And this is I just printed out the expectation suite. And the second pipeline, it's actually taking that same expectation suite and running it through that data frame. And then crucially, it's storing that result in S3. So now that these 2 pipelines are almost done, so the validation failed in this case because I split up the data and we overfit on the data, but it doesn't really matter. What's important is that I could fetch the result of that in my downstream step, even though this was not in memory. So even though the result was not remaining in memory anymore, I could fetch it back. And that's very important. So what do I mean? So if I, for example, in the future, if my teammate or someone else wanted to actually see where my result was of this particular pipeline, so let's say the first pipeline, I could simply use my simple ZenML syntax to get my pipeline, get the latest run of my pipeline, and get the step which produced the profile. And you can see that this will result in a simple step view, which shows you that actually the grid expectations profiler step is the step that we're looking for. If you look at the outputs of that step, you can even see where that step has stored the actual suite. And if I wanted, I could probably read it. I'm not sure if this works so great, but yes, you can even read it straight into your notebook. So you can have your expectation materialized for you, and ZenML handles that as well. This is even cooler, I think, with the second pipeline. So just quickly, and you can see that the second pipeline has, I believe, yeah, only 1 output, and I can read that. And this is actually in result, right? So this, I imagine this is this is a great expectation. So thing which, so like you can fetch it, but you can't print it in a notebook. So I can fetch it in a variable. And then I can, yeah, I mean, there are many variables associated with it. I think status was one. I'm not sure, but yeah, it's a checkpoint result. So maybe one of the great expectation guys will help me. If I look into my, it's my it's dot success, yes. That's what I wanted to show. So I can see, for example, that this is a failed validation result. So I can, in memory, quickly query, no matter if I ran this pipeline a year ago, the versioning of the data docs is done automatically. Just to make this a bit more visual, ZenML has a way to visualize these pipelines locally. I mean, if you run on Kubeflow or Airflow, that they're already visualized, but you also have a local visualizer. And you can see this is the first pipeline. And here you can see, for example, that the data set is stored here in S3. The expectation suite name is breast cancer suite, and it's stored here. And if I wanted to see, for example, my second pipeline, that looks a bit like this. So it would also look very similar to this. And what's really interesting is we also have a built-in visualizer, which actually visualizes the data docs for you directly. So you can actually materialize your data docs locally with this visualizer that we've built, which is basically using the visualizer that Great Expectations already has. And the fun thing is that the run name of the suite is the same as the pipeline run name. So you have a complete lineage between your pipeline runs. I mean, you could be doing a lot in your pipeline, right? You might be deploying a model after this. You might be doing some experiment tracking, and having like a centralized metadata store like ZenML to track these pipelines is quite cool. All right, so, and then, I mean, maybe I can also run this quickly. Yeah, so there is, for example, the second pipeline. And like the last thing I wanted to show you guys was that if I, for example, run my pipeline again, so let's say I ran my validation pipeline again, and let's say this is like a downstream step that happens like a week later or something. Like ZenML obviously will track those new results as well. But what it will also do is the depth of this integration is that we have actually created a data context in Great Expectations terms that links the notion of a ZenML artifact store to the Great Expectations data context. And what that means is it's like by coupling these concepts together, if I was to go to my data docs again, excuse me for a second, I'll just run that visualized results again. This will open up my data docs again. But if I go here, you will see that actually it's not a separate data docs that is lying somewhere else. It's actually together already. So my validation results are also coupled together with my pipeline runs. And my expectation suite is just the same suite that we had. So we have a complete lineage and we have a complete merging of our concepts with this one neat tool that lets you write these pipelines. And by the way, you can run these pipelines on whatever you want. You would have complete data versioning and data lineage of the entire expectation suite and the results. So yeah, that's the presentation I wanted to make. I hope I'm not over time. Just a few quick links for you guys. Maybe someone can pop it in the chat. We have a blog post that explains all this. ZenML sets up Great Expectations. To go into further details, we were also very happy to have now official Great Expectations reference architecture for ZenML inside the Great Expectations docs themselves. So you can also read that. It's pretty much a bit more a Great Expectations view of these things. And if you wanted to try it out yourself, I encourage you to go to our repository at zenml-io/ZenML on GitHub. And we have the Great Expectations data validation example that I just showed you, which basically does the exact same thing or a variation of that. Yeah, I look forward that you guys run these pipelines in production, and hopefully it's very useful.
Thanks, Hamza. That was awesome. Really like the UX for the CLI. Just a heads up, I just noticed that we've been having problems with Netlify posting our docs, so those might be. I think I'm really happy that you already had that link up for the docs, because I just tried to open it and there was an issue. So I guess everyone just be patient. Be patient with that.
No worries.
I see Tanner has his hand raised. Tanner, if you're still there and have a question, you can let it rip.
I don't. Apparently, I mashed the raise hand button, but that was a great presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Tanner.
Thanks, Tanner.
Does anyone else have any questions?
I'd be interested to hear also the Great Expectations team's opinion on it, or maybe anyone else in the community, because it's very new. And from the ZenML perspective, we work together with you guys, Kyle, as you know, and I'd be very interested if there's a use case that we could find. If someone immediately finds it useful, if you could pop it in the chat, it would give some sort of validation for the work that's been done.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we should, now that we'll be presenting this, we'll do some follow-up with the community and seeing who's using it and find some early adopters. So if anyone in here is going to start experimenting with ZenML, definitely let us know so we can get some feedback and then even help you get started. So we can start learning more about how this integration is helping you all.
Awesome.
Cool.
Cheers, Kyle.
All right. Thanks so much, Hamza. All right. We have reached the end. I think I mentioned earlier, that bit about cloud. I see Ben is here, who it's now a tradition for me to put him on the spot in the community meetups. But like I said, if you're interested in becoming an early user, Ben actually is a great person to chat with if you see him on Slack. And then Ben, if you want to say more.
Thanks, Kyle, for putting me on the spot. Yeah, fun to be here. Just reach out to me if you'd like to learn more about our cloud product. We're getting pretty excited about what we've got going on over there. So anyway, great to see everyone. That was awesome. I really want to play around with ZenML this weekend now. So
yeah, definitely do that, Ben. I think you'd give some great feedback. Cool.
And join our Slack community if you want. So we have. It would be great to have you on the weekend.
Yeah, get in there and mix it up. Cool. All right. Well, thanks everyone. See you next month.
Later all.
Bye.